I started off in surface mining, working as a surface mine inspector. I then transitioned into working in mine subsidence, from there to mine reclamation, and then I finished my career working for the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mine Safety, and I retired as the mining engineer manager in 2021. We're going to talk about coal mining here in southwestern Pennsylvania. Mostly I'm going to talk about it in a historical aspect to relating more to the area here, because frankly the mining was done here at a pretty early time period. So it'll be geared more towards that. We might touch on a few things that are more relatable today, but we'll try to keep it more historical. So just quickly, we're going to cover some of the history. We're going to talk about the Pittsburgh coal seam, some of the mining methods, and then of course something near and dear to my heart is the safety aspect. So in Pennsylvania we have two main coal fields. We have the bituminous coal field, that's what's colored in the yellow here, and then over in the eastern part of the state this is the anthracite region, and you can see there's a lot more bituminous coal than the anthracite coal. The anthracite coal mining started a little bit earlier than it did here in the bituminous region. These seams over here are noted for being on a very steep pitch, often at a pitch like this, where here in the bituminous we're mostly level. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we move on. The anthracite was probably primarily used for home heating at the time, a little bit of industrial, a little bit of steel making. Here, the bituminous coal, historically, obviously, what created the boom was the steel making. That's why we had all the coke ovens here, the beehive coke ovens. It was also used for home heating, and up into about the 1950s, it was used extensively by the railroads too for the power for the steam engines. This is a map that was prepared by the Works Progress Administration in the 1930s, about 1936 is when they did this last mapping. And this is showing where the Pittsburgh coal seam outcrops. So this dark line, anything within this dark line is where there's Pittsburgh coal. Where it's shaded is showing you that the coal's already been mined out. So you can see by 1936, almost all of this underground coal had been depleted by the time the Depression rolled around. And as you can see further to the west, there's no Pittsburgh coal here, and not till you get further over towards the other side of Layton, towards the town of Banning, Jacobs Creek, Van Meter, and then you'll find the Pittsburgh coal seam again.
Point out the different mines.
So yeah, so some of the local mines we had here. You had the Nellie mine here, the Clarissa mine, it's just not quite showing up, it was right over in here. The Butte mines, the Paul mine here, the Fort Hill mine, and here you had the Sterling mines, and obviously Frick controlled a lot of this, but you also had Rainey. A name pretty familiar to this area is Cochran. So, you know, those were the major sort of players in the coal industry back here in the late 1800s into the early 1900s.
And if you want a better look, you can look at that map.
Yeah, so once we're done here, there's a bigger version of this map on the table. If you're curious, come up. If you have any questions, we'll answer them for you. So, history of coal mining in Pennsylvania. They first started mining coal in the 1700s down in Pittsburgh, what's now Mount Washington. First coke production here in Fayette County, 1817, is linked to Isaac Meeson's iron mill at Plumsock Works. I tried to find where this was located. If there's anybody in the room that knows where that is, shout out. But I can't tell you where the Plumsock Works was in Fayette County. The Isaac Meeson house is still standing. It's adjacent to the old Laurel Mall. And there are remnants of many of the iron furnaces in the area. The Mount Vernon furnace is a pretty good example. It's fairly intact if you ever get a chance to see that. A name familiar to this area, James Cochran, that was Sarah's father-in-law. First shipped coke in 1843. He floated the coke on the river to Cincinnati. And then beginning in 1910s, technology and industrial improvements reduced the demand for the Pittsburgh seam, which is a very high quality coal for metallurgical purposes. And really, again, by the time the Depression hit, the coal was pretty depleted in this area. We'll talk about that here a little bit more too. So the Pittsburgh coal seam is the thickest and most extensive coal bed in the Appalachian Basin. I would argue that it was probably the most valuable coal seam on the planet Earth. Especially the Connellsville district contained the highest quality coal and was the best coal for making coke in America. Other factors that made this seam really attractive is that it's a thick seam. It's 8 to 14 feet high. A lot of our coal mines today, they're about this high, maybe a little lower. We have some that are less than 3 feet in height. So you can imagine spending your day maybe about the height of this table. As I said, with the Pittsburgh coal seam, you got to walk upright like man's meant to. It's also easily accessible because it outcrops in the hillside. I'm throwing around some terms. We're going to talk about some terminology here later. Hopefully that'll clear some things up for everybody. So this map is showing you the aerial extent of the Pittsburgh coal seam. The yellow line is the boundary of Pennsylvania, Greene County, Washington County, Fayette County, and the red star is Dawson. You can see this sort of finger here of the coal. That's called the Connellsville Klondike. And the bituminous coals in this region are the highest quality on the eastern side, and the quality degrades as you go westward. So the mines over here now, the big underground mines that Consol has, Bailey, Enlow, Harvey mines, most of that coal is being produced for the steam market for producing electricity. It's not a real high grade metallurgical coking coal. Because of the increased demand for the coke in the time period, mines increased the production of coal from 4.3 million tons of coal in 1880 to a peak of 40 million tons in 1916. Anybody want to hazard a guess why that number was so high in 1916?
War.
There you go, World War I. So you had the demand for the steel for the war effort. Okay, mining methods. We're not really going to talk a lot about surface mining. Of course, there's been some surface mining in the area. They were basically going in on those outcrops and mining coal. But we have three main ways that we access the coal seam. Primarily here during that time period, they would have been drift mines. So the coal seam would have been sticking out of the hillside here, and they would have just gone directly into the hillside. Once they'd gone far enough under the hill for ventilation purposes and also for access to put the men in the mine, they would have put some shafts in. And then later on, when they were using belt conveyor systems to bring the coal out of the mine, they would have put slopes in. One of my pet peeves, so we're going to clear something up for everybody right now. This is a shaft. This is an entry. I hear a lot of people call this a mine shaft. This is not a mine shaft. This is a mine shaft. This is a good example of a coal outcrop. Maybe not quite as thick as the Pittsburgh coal seam, but pretty close. And so you can see what a perfect place to start a coal mine. Grab your pick, start digging away, go right in underneath the hillside. The primary mining method that's been employed from the day they started mining coal in Pennsylvania, still utilized today, and you can see this is actually showing you with some more modern equipment. This is called the room and pillar mining method. So these are the rooms, and obviously these are the pillars. And so we call these entries, and then these are called crosscuts. This is the coal face. The walls are referred to as the rib. And then this is the roof, top or back, and then the mine floor. This mining method, obviously the reason to leave the coal pillars behind is to support the roof as you're continuing your mining. Again, just another shot to give you a layout of what the mine might look like. This is a newer mine where they were using a conveyor system to bring the coal out of the mine. Thing to note is you probably were mining only 40 to 70% of the coal with this room and pillar mining method. 70 is probably pretty generous. Probably 50% is a pretty good number. So if you think about it as the coal owner, this is your money in the bank, right? And if all you're going to do is room and pillar mining, you're leaving half of your money in the bank. So what they did is what's called retreat mining. Once they advanced their works up so far, usually where they came to the boundary of either their coal lease or the coal they owned, then they would start to remove the pillars as they were coming back out of the mine. They would start chipping away at these pillars. Ideally, you want to remove all of the pillar. Again, the more coal you mine, the more money you make. You actually want the roof to collapse when you do this. I know that would sound kind of crazy as a coal miner that you want the roof to cave in, but you want it to cave in a controlled manner. They would set posts called breaker posts to control how far the fall would go before they would start to remove some more of these pillars. It's still a pretty dangerous mining method. Even today, we have some more modern things that we use to help support the roof. And there are still a few mines that employ this system, but this is where you make your money, is on retreat mining. This is more what it would have looked like working in a coal mine here during the time period that most of this coal was mined. This shot is around 1900. A couple things to note here. You see they have an open flame on their head. These are an oil lamp. I think there's an example here of one. So one of the things that makes mining dangerous is the release of the methane gas. And so you have an ignition source that you're carrying around on your head the entire day you're working. Obviously one of the great hazards. This man is operating a hand auger. A lot of the work was done with a pick, just a pick miner. But with the development of explosives, they used explosives a good bit in the mine. Of course, he's using what I call an Armstrong loader. And probably off out of the shot there would have been a coal wagon here that he's going to shovel the coal into the coal wagon. So what this fella is doing is he is undercutting the coal. This is called cutting a kerf. You can see he's utilizing his shovel to hold his shoulders up off of the ground so he can more easily swing his pick. Here he has set what's called a sprag, and so it's a short wood post with a piece of plank, and that's to try to hold that coal face so it doesn't collapse on him and injure or kill him. If you look down over here, you'll see this safety lamp, and we're going to talk about the safety lamps in a little more detail further on in the discussion. But the idea of cutting this kerf is that when they would want to blast this, if you dig this out from underneath, when they set off the explosives, the coal will tend to then drop straight down. Instead of just wanting to shoot down the entryway, it's going to make it harder to gather it up and clean it up and get it loaded into a coal wagon. You were starting to get some mechanization in the early 1900s. This is one of the earlier machines. This is a coal cutting machine. This is replacing that guy laying on his side, swinging a pick and undercutting the coal. You can see it kind of looks like a big chainsaw. And that's really what it was. It was a chainsaw. This one is electric powered. Here's the cable here that powered the machine. This next slide will give you a little better illustration of a different model of machine, but the same idea. He's undercutting the coal here. Then someone would come in and go ahead and drill this, and then they would blast it and then come in and hand load it into the cars. So what I want to talk about now is obviously, I spent a portion of my career focused on safety in the mines. So we're going to talk about roof support, ventilation, and then we're going to talk about the mine safety lamps. So, we're going to talk a lot about 1907. A lot of this mining was hot and heavy in this region in 1907. This actually turned out to be the deadliest year in Pennsylvania mining history in 1907. In the 30-year period from 1877 to 1907, there were 6,347 people lost their lives about the PA bituminous mines. Now you remember that map. That's just the western half of Pennsylvania. This doesn't include any fatalities in the anthracite region. Over 6,000 of those people were killed inside the mine, 274 outside. My guess is a lot of those were probably folks working in around the beehive coke ovens. Most of these people were killed by falls of coal and slate. 979, 16% were killed by explosions. 13% were killed by mine cars, 9% miscellaneous. In 1907 alone, there were 806 fatalities in the coal mines. Wrap that number around your head. Talk about a dangerous place to work. 239 of those were in the Dar mine. I don't know how many people are familiar with the Dar mine, but the Dar mine was located at Van Meter, just down the river. This explosion occurred on December 19th in 1907. 239 fatalities. This, by the way, is the worst mining disaster in Pennsylvania history, is the Dar mine explosion. But just prior to this, on December 1st, 1907, in Fayette City, there were 34 fatalities when the Naomi mine exploded. Some of those displaced miners had come to work in the Dar mine. Not a very good fate. And then on December 6th, so just 5 days after the Naomi mine, the Monongah number 6 and number 8 mine in West Virginia exploded, killing 362 people. The worst mining disaster in U.S. history. So there you go. From December 1st to December 19th, 34 fatalities, 239 fatalities, 362 fatalities. So, before we do this video, we're going to talk a little bit about a mine explosion. And so, the methane gas that gets released out of the coal is what propagates that explosion, gets that explosion started. What makes the explosions very violent is the very fine float coal dust, because they're using, the mules and whatnot to pull those wagons in and out of the mine. It created an awful lot of dust. And before they started using rock dust, which is pulverized lime, to coat everything, the only method they had to try to reduce that dust level was to just water it all the time. Well, it didn't always work. So they've conducted a lot of research down at the Brewston mine down near South Park Library area, the United States Bureau of Mines. And so we're going to show you a video of a gas and dust explosion that they set off. We hope we are, anyhow. I think you have to hit control. Yeah, you ready? Go ahead.
What am I doing?
You need to click on that link.
I can't see it.
Can you click it?
I'm trying to.
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's not here in the right spot.
Not going to work?
No.
Okay.
You may need to exit the PowerPoint in order to click it.
Oh, we could do that. Hit. Let's see.
I say we can hit it at the end of the, when we get down to the end.
And show.
Go ahead, go ahead, click on it.
No internet.
Wait. My hotspot should still be on.
Yeah, it says not.
Hang on.
Accents.
Hotspot's still on, so come down here. Yes, there you go. Connect. And by the way, this experimental mine is still being used today, although I don't know if you've been following the news, this is one of the things that's being cut by the Department of Government Efficiency. Obviously, I'm not a fan of this because of miner safety.
It's gonna connect.
The Bureau of Mine Safety, we would go to this mine every year and we would do training. Hang on, go ahead. You did it again. Go back up.
What?
Click on it.
It's not gonna work. It's not connecting to your.
Okay. Well, we'll skip it then. Go back to the PowerPoint.
That's what I was doing. There we go. Okay.
All right. So, roof support. So, props was a main means of supporting the roof during this time period. Basically, what you do is you take 2 sticks and you measure the height of the roof, lay it down on your prop, take your handsaw, cut the prop, and then you drive a wedge in the top of it to tighten it up against the roof. This is actually a little bit newer shot. The thing that gives it away is there are roof bolts here in the roof, which in the late 1800s, 1900s, they weren't utilizing roof bolts. The use of roof bolts didn't become very prevalent probably till late 40s into the 1950s. Another means of roof support was just wood timbers. You can see these squared off timbers. They just have a post on either end. And obviously the reason for doing that is you want to leave the access way open. You need to be able to haul those wagons in and out. If you put a bunch of posts in there, you're not going to have enough room to maneuver in there. So another example of some of the wood timbers. You can see these are actually still round and they flattened it on the ends where they're going to have the posts in underneath. So, adding roof support was often left to as deemed necessary. There were no industry-wide standards, nor were there any laws for the installation of roof supports. The miners weren't paid for putting in roof supports. The miners were paid for the coal that came out of the pit mouth. So one of the things, a couple things to note in this picture. One, again, you can see they've got a candle on their head, basically an open flame. And what do you see for a roof support in this mine? There's not a post, there's not a timber, there's not anything. So they probably, as deemed necessary, would have used a tool similar to this with a non-sparking end, and they would have gone in. It's called sounding the roof. And so if it makes a nice ringing sound, you've got a good solid roof. If it makes a thunk, kind of like that, it probably is telling you that that rock is hanging down a little bit and there's a gap there. So you would either put a post or a timber underneath there, or you'd pry it down. All right, so mine ventilation, obviously, you know, with the methane gas, you can imagine if you've tunneled back in the hillside a couple of miles, the air can get pretty stale back there, not to mention accumulations of gases, primarily either methane gas or a gas that's called black damp, and we'll describe those in a little more detail here. The first type of ventilation was the use of just natural air currents. This would be most efficient where you'd have 2 openings, particularly if there was a slope to it, you had one opening higher than the other. So you were counting on the changes of air temperature throughout the day or barometric pressure changes. And again, efficient is very generous because the direction of the air current could change throughout the day. So really not a very safe way to ventilate a mine, but it was done. And again, barometric pressure influenced the releases of gas, not just the methane gas, but the black damp. A low pressure allows more gas to release, which is probably why we had a lot of those explosions occurring in December, when you're starting to get some more lousy weather coming in, lower barometric pressures. Next up was the use of furnaces, just like your fireplace at home. You get that flue heated up and it draws the smoke up the flue. Same thing here. They would use a furnace with the heat, have an upcast shaft that would pull the air through the mine and exhaust out. Then we came to powered fans. They were either steam or electric powered during the early 1900s. Most of the fans used were, we call an exhaust fan. So they were set up to draw the air through the mine. Think about, using a straw to drink, a soda or, water out of a glass. It's the same principle, they're sucking, so it's a negative pressure. Some of the advantages to that is that because it's a negative pressure, it'll tend to draw the gases out of the coal and expel it out of the mine. When I retired here in Pennsylvania, every single mine except for one was on an exhaust ventilation system. If you put it on the front end and you blow the air through the mine, that's a positive pressure, tends not to allow the gas to escape as readily. We had one mine that was utilizing that system, and the reason being, they had abandoned mines and a seam above and a seam below, and the interval between was pretty thin. And there was a fear that if we used a negative pressure system, it might actually start drawing gases out of those abandoned mines through the strata. So that's why that mine employed a blowing ventilation system. So, in 1907, the area here was covered by the 9th Bituminous District. There were probably 20-some bituminous districts at the time, but here in this part of Fayette County. So some of the local mines. The Clarissa mine was using a furnace. The Nellie mine, the Fort Hill, the Paul mine, they were all using steam-powered fans. The Fayette mine that was near Dunbar was still using natural ventilation, and only 2 mines in the district were utilizing electric-powered mine fans. So in 1907, you still had all 3 of those types of ventilation systems being used. So we saw these guys walking around with a light, a flame on their head. In 1815, a man by the last name of Davy invented what's called a safety lamp, which these are a variation of a safety lamp. But these first safety lamps were not developed for the detection of gases. These were developed for a safe means of illumination. You can see there's a wire mesh here. These later versions actually have inside this bonnet 2 sets of mesh. So it allows the gases to come into here and the gases will burn, but it keeps the flame from propagating out through there and creating an explosion. So these here, were totally used for gas detection in the mine. And we'll see if it's actually going to light. Hey! So they would light these lamps, and then there's graduated rings in there. And so they would set the height of the flame, and usually if they were going to do a gas detection, the flame would be set low. And if you're looking for gas, methane gas is lighter than atmosphere. So it's going to tend to collect near the ceiling, in pockets and cavities in the roof. So you would often see, they'd be holding this thing up like this, looking at it. Conversely, if you have black damp, and black damp is oxygen deficient atmosphere, it's carbon dioxide. It's heavier than atmosphere. It's going to collect closer down to the mine floor. So if you're going to do that, you'd want to set the flame higher because it's oxygen deficient. It's going to make the flame go down. And they actually had you could actually measure the concentration of the gas by the height of the flame. Obviously, that took some skill and practice to be able to do that. These were still used in Pennsylvania into the 1990s. I worked one summer in a coal mine when I was in college, the Banning Number 4 mine. And so, all of the bosses would have a flame safety lamp. The guys that were right at the mine face, particularly the miner operator, the continuous miner operator, or the roof bolters, these guys would all have a flame safety lamp. And the bosses typically had it on their belt. So it was a dead giveaway when the boss was coming because you could see the flame safety lamp. We're going to put that back down so it doesn't stink up the place again. So here you can see damp. It's a derivative of the German word Dampf, meaning vapor or gas. So methane is fire damp, and then black damp. And to go back, we were talking about the explosions. Most of the fatalities during an explosion were not a result of the blast. It was, they called the after damp, which would have been carbon monoxide from the burning. So most of them, some of the men were killed just from the force of the explosion, but the bulk of them probably died from suffocation. So you can imagine, I don't know, I think I probably would rather have been killed by the concussion of the blast instead of suffocating to death. Yes, another feature of these are called a locking safety lamp. So these lamps couldn't be opened underground. You can't open it. So you had a lamp man that would maintain these. Every day when you'd come out of the mine, you'd turn your lamp in. The lamp man would disassemble them, inspect the gauze, make sure there's no holes opening up in the gauze. There's gaskets on the globes, making sure those gaskets are intact. And to open it, they have this magnet. So you have the magnet. Then you can open up the lamp to go ahead and disassemble it, refill it with fuel if you need to replace flints in it, and just overall perform the maintenance on it. Put it back together, and it's locked again. Somebody way smarter than me came up with that. All right, so you can see there's his lamp. Likely during this time period, that lamp wasn't necessarily for testing for gases. That probably was his illumination. This is nice and bright in here because they probably had lights in here in order to take this photograph. Again, it's a pick miner. He's swinging a pick to dig the coal. But you notice there are some roof supports in here. But one of the things that made mining such a dangerous occupation, even with where these roof supports are, what kind of roof support's over his head? There's no roof support whatsoever, right? So today when you mine, we have roof bolts. Law says every 4 feet this way, every 4 feet this way. And it is against the law to go past those roof bolts. But again, a little more safer practice here. He's at least got some set. He also has a sprag set here in front of his wagon to keep the wagon from rolling away. Once he picks this all down, he's going to get his Armstrong loader, shovel it in. 16 tons, right? So a little more modern photo, but again, you see what's hanging up here? Now, he has an electric cap light on his head. There's probably illumination on this machine. It has lights on it. So that's purely for making gas examinations. In the state of Pennsylvania, you're required to make examinations for gas every 20 minutes at the face. So as the miner operator, he's got his mine safety lamp there. And these are roof bolts in the roof here. And so you can see he's working under a supported roof. Not like that other poor guy who had no type of roof support over his head. Just to give you a quick description of the machine, this here drum would rotate and it has bits on it. And so it would claw the coal down and it would land here. And then the front of this machine had a big scoop. And then it had two gathering arms that basically did this. And it would scoop the coal into the center. And there's a conveyor runs up the center of this machine and then dumps back here into the machine they would have been using now. It's called a shuttle car. And they'd have been dumping the coal into the shuttle car. I'm going to guess that this photo is sometime in the 1960s. And the giveaway to me is there is no canopy on this machine. In 1969, the federal government enacted the Mine Safety and Health Act, and it required canopies to be placed on all the equipment in underground coal mines.
Thanks.
You got an itchy finger?
No, it fell off my leg.
That's all right. So yeah, that would be my guess. Today, the man doesn't even sit on the machine. They're all remote control. This guy would be standing back here somewhere. He'd have a controller that has a strap that holds the controller. And just like kids playing a video game, he's going to be standing back operating the piece of equipment. Actually, in most of the mines today, he's going to be like this, operating the machinery. Okay. So another thing that they claim was an issue with safety in the mines was the language barrier. We had thousands of immigrants pouring into this country in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Primarily Europeans and a lot of Southern Europeans. And so this is right out of the 1907 report that we've referenced earlier. The greatest difficulties to contend with in any effort to lessen fatalities seem to be the carelessness of the workers and their ignorance of mining knowledge and of the English language. Not being able to understand the language, the task of controlling them and teaching them the rules of the mines regarding safety is extremely hard. Some folks take a little exception to this because probably part of the reason there was more fatalities with some of these men is because they were also given the most dangerous jobs to do in the mine. They were the poor pick miners. So they were the guys working under the unsupported roof. And because of that language barrier, during this time period, most of the bosses were going to be English speakers. So they were English, Welsh, Irish, Scotch. I'd mentioned earlier about Star Junction. These are coke ovens in Star Junction. And you can see the sign here, and here's the blow up of it. It says danger in 6 languages. So imagine you have someone who basically just came through Ellis Island, got off the boat probably 2 weeks ago. He probably doesn't know 5 English words. And you're going to explain to him how to go into a mine that he's never done in his life before and how he's going to do that job. I mean, it was all, yeah, it was pointing, it was hand signals, So there probably was some element of truth to that being a barrier to safety here is the language barrier. So we can't really talk about this time period in mining without talking about labor issues and really labor unrest. And so it really came down probably more to pay, work hours, and then safety. And frankly, safety didn't dramatically improve here in the United States until the 1970s. I'd mentioned the 1969 Mine Safety and Health Act. We have a saying, go ahead, you can switch that slide. So coal miners really led the way for the rights to unionize and negotiate for better wages, working hours, and safer conditions. This struggle went on for decades, probably from the 1870s well into 1930. Here locally, probably a lot of people are familiar with the Moorwood Massacre in 1891. The miners went on strike there and they marched on the Moorwood Works. They were met by the local law enforcement who just fired into the crowd, killing 9 of the miners. This went on all over the United States. This is not an isolated incident. Things didn't really begin to improve for the coal miners until 1932 when Franklin Roosevelt became president. When I worked in the Bureau of Mine Safety, we had a saying that the safety laws of Pennsylvania were written in the blood of miners. I think you can probably say the same thing about the labor laws we have today too. They were written in the blood of miners. I think a lot of people have heard the term, I owe my soul to the company store. A lot of the miners were paid with company script, meaning that was their own currency. They didn't get paid in US currency. So the company would go to their employee and hand them their pay in this hand, and then they'd go, oh, by the way, that's what you owe for rent on the house I own that you're living in. And oh, by the way, your script is only good at the company store that I own. So they were basically putting their pay in this hand and taking it back out of this hand. I think they call that a Ponzi scheme, maybe? So before we go on, I want... I can see he's thrilled. Do me a favor. Put that on. Hey, fits you pretty nice, doesn't it?
It didn't fit me.
Hand it to him. Have him try it on. Doesn't fit you worth a darn. Were people really small back then? Look at this hat. Not a chance, right? Why is that? This is why.
Am I switching it?
Yeah. Because they were made for kids. That's why. Now this is probably a shot from the anthracite region. These were what they call breaker boys. And this is where after the coal came out of the mine, and it would come down chutes, and they'd be sitting on wooden benches picking the slate out of the coal. And that's what they were using, these pieces of wood to kind of push the slate off to the side. But there's probably a kid in here that's hardly over the age of 12. Again, another shot. These boys are mule drivers. Again, young teenage boys. A couple things to note in here. Well, one, you can see his whip to move that mule along. But you notice on their heads, what do they have? Open flame. And what do you see for roof support in this mine? There's not a thing in here. So in 1938, Congress passed the Fair Labor Standards Act, better known as the Federal Wage and Hour Law. The law established a minimum wage and a 40-hour work week and banned children under 18 from working in hazardous jobs such as mining. I think this may be a little contrived. I don't think this lad probably was really swinging this pick. I'm not sure about whether he was actually a pipe smoker at that age or not. Could have been, or chewing tobacco. But, there probably were some kids of this age. They were big enough to pick up a lump of coal and toss it into the coal wagon underground. So a lot of accounts of one of the, our father grew up in Van Meter, and so knew a lot of the older folks there. Okay, this is pretty much going to wrap it up. I want to thank everybody. A couple of last topics I want to talk about. One of the other programs I worked in was the Mine Subsidence Insurance Program. How many of you know whether your house is located over an abandoned mine? If you don't have the Mine Subsidence Insurance, I would encourage you to get the insurance. One, it's run through the state of Pennsylvania. This is not an insurance company. This is not a for-profit program. And again, I haven't worked in this program in 20 years, but even 20 years ago, you could probably protect your house for around $150 a year. Now, we used to go work home shows to promote the Mine Subsidence Insurance, and I would tell people, I've spent that kind of money in a night, and I didn't have anything but a fat head and a sour stomach to show for it the next day. So, not that I'm proud to say that, but that's not a lot of money to protect one of the largest investments you're going to make in your life outside of sending your kids to college. That's probably going to be a bigger investment today. So, this is the website. If you're curious, break your phone out, take a picture of it, and then down, this is actually a website. All of the mind maps that they have in the mind map repository down in our California office, they have on this website. You open it up, the state of Pennsylvania pops up, and you can take a look at the actual mind maps where your house is located. Then if you have questions about the Mind Subscience Insurance, you can get on there. You can just do a Google search, PADEP, Mind Subscience Insurance. It'll take you right to the website. So I would encourage you, if you don't know, go look. When I first started in this program, we had a Mind Subscience event occurred near Monaca. We had no records of this mine. So no one in the neighborhood had Mind Subscience Insurance. When the first part of the event occurred, there were 2 homes that were impacted. They had no Mind Subscience Insurance. Well, obviously that set off a panic in the neighborhood. And we flooded the neighborhood. You know, the engineers, we'd go in, we'd make an examination of the house. If it wasn't being impacted by subsidence, we could sell you an insurance policy. So we had our insurance agents there. We literally had people, as soon as you wrote the check and handed it to us, your policy was in effect. We had policies that we wrote on one day and had people call us the next day because, like dominoes, the pillars in the mine were failing. And by the time that event stopped, there were 22 homes that were damaged. One of the homes that was first hit, his repair bill, now this is in the early 2000s, was $80,000. So he basically bought his house twice. While the other folks, they were able to provide the insurance for their homes. So again, if you don't know, check it out. It's cheap, and it's cheap peace of mind. So thank you. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them for you. Again, there's a map up here if you want to take a look at the map. You got any questions about any of the other stuff? But again, thank you.
I have a question that's not really, kind of unrelated, but
Yes.
related. What makes the coal so much better in one area than another? Is it nature? I mean, deposit, how the...
Yes, and so a lot of it has to do with the amount of carbon content that's in it. And then it also had to do with the tectonic movements and the mountain building and just the way diamonds are formed. So diamonds are actually, had been coal at one time, right? So it's just greater pressure, greater heat.
Thank you.
So yes, and as I mentioned, further east here in the bituminous, higher grade. Further west, it's utilized more for just the production of steam for electrical generation.
Is that probably because of the length of time it's been underground? I would say on the east, because the inland sea would have washed it up there first, and as that proceeded, it would continually made it thinner and thinner, and probably less under.
Well, but it would have been, the deposition would have occurred at the same time though. So the Pittsburgh coal seam, it's dead plant material. There's a lot of times when, particularly in the shale that overlies that, you could pull a piece down. A lot of times you'd see fern, different kind of fossils in them. So it's really decayed plants. But anywhere it's the Pittsburgh coal seam, it was all deposited in the same time period. Now we have multiple coal seams in Pennsylvania. Right now in the bituminous coal field that are currently being mined, you have the Pittsburgh coal seam. We've historically mined above the Pittsburgh coal seam, the Swickley coal seam, and then the Waynesburg coal seam. Below the Pittsburgh coal seam, the next mineable seam is about 700 feet below the Pittsburgh. You have the upper Freeport, then you have the lower Freeport, the upper Katanning, the middle Katanning, the lower Katanning, and then the Brookville and Clarion seams. And those have all been underground mined at one time or another.
Actually, some of the Pittsburgh coal, you can see it outcropping if you go back in along Jacobs Creek, and Creek Hills down there, and you follow the track down right where it drops off there, there's,
Now, is this near Chaintown?
yeah, right at, yeah.
That's probably the upper Freeport coal seam.
And it's coming out right there.
Yes.
When you drop off next to the tracks and go down in.
Yes.
There, the creek, it's right there on the side.
Yeah, that was actually the Florence mine, and that was in the upper Freeport coal seam there. Again, there's no Pittsburgh coal, basically from Dawson all the way till you get right to the top of Banning Hill is where you pick up the Pittsburgh coal seam again. So in between any of the seams that outcrop are going to be more minor seams. You might have the Brush Creek, some of these other seams, but that in particular, there was an underground mine there, probably in the 1920s, that was called the Florence mine.
So it must have been down under. Yeah, this has never been mined. You can just see the coal right in the sun.
Right. You can see coal seam outcrops if you go down Layton Hill.
Oh, yeah.
There's a couple of places that you'll see coal seams outcropping there. And again, those in the stratigraphic column, those would be lower than the Pittsburgh coal seam. How hard would it be to get back to this map?
Yeah, they went in and took the pillars out across from our other house where we lived up near Pleasant Unity. And then just above that, when they plow that, I'd go out there and pick up fossils, and that was not too far from the top of the mine.
Right.
It wasn't very far from where that woman fell into that hole.
Yes.
Actually, I walked across that mine numerous times where she fell in.
Yep. Out by Monday's restaurant.
Yeah.
So when you look at this map, you can see these lines and there's numbers. And these are actually contours of the coal seam. And this is the elevation above sea level. So as we come way out here, you can see the coal is 1,200 feet above sea level. Here it's 1,220. Well, if you were to continue going, you'd be, 1,300, 1,400, 1,500. Well, the surface isn't that high. So all that coal's been eroded away over time. And as you go towards Connellsville, our rock doesn't lie perfectly horizontal. It does this, right? And so these are anticlines,
Compressed, yes.
and these are called synclines. So this is going into the syncline. So the coal's going deeper. So you're going to be going downhill. So one of the disadvantages mining this way is this is where all the water is going to accumulate. So you're going to be setting pumps down here. You're going to constantly be pumping water in order to go ahead and continue to mine this coal. But you can see it didn't stop them. They mined it all. Cleaned it out pretty good.
Yeah, I know that some of the mine owners were notorious for just going back under people's property and taking the coal up from right over under the barns. And they could actually hear them working, but they hadn't enough money to file a claim.
Well, and so some of the other things that have occurred, I've had people when I was working the mine subsidence insurance, they'd say, oh, I looked at those mine maps. There's a big block of coal underneath my house. I'm going,
Probably not.
the day they drew the map. So all these places that it outcrops, you can go right in there, right? So there are places in the town of Bell Vernon that people's foundations are actually right into the Pittsburgh coal seam. So during the Depression, they just knocked a hole in the wall. And they went in there and just went in and robbed those pillars in there. Now, if it's really deep, you're way out here where it's going to be, a few hundred feet deep, somebody probably wasn't going in there and robbing the pillars. But anywhere it's out here along these outcrops, I would make no guarantees to how much there. I had a colleague that lived in Bell Vernon, and he had a collapse in his yard. And he said, back then I was young and I'm not thinking about it. He said, I went and got a ladder, stuck it down in a hole, took my flashlight. He said, I went down there and he said, as far as my flashlight beam would shine, there was nothing but a void. He
I know we went back
immediately
to coal
bought
mine.
mine subsidence insurance.
We went back in a coal mine up on a hill above our place, so, when we were kids, we shot at bats with a shotgun.
So, and again, working for the Bureau of Abandoned Mine Reclamation, we have actually had fatalities of folks going into these abandoned mines. Back in the 70s, I think it was in South Park, some kids had found a place where it had collapsed. And trust me, there are places that I've seen you want, like where this woman just died this past winter by the Monday's restaurant. There probably was hardly 10 feet of cover over the mine there.
Yeah.
And I think probably a lot of those areas, they mined that in the wintertime when the ground was frozen, so it didn't collapse on them. But so these kids found the collapse, and being kids, they're curious, and they got an old ladder and put it in there, and now that was their clubhouse. Well, they went in there, and then it was a day that the weather started to turn bad. It was a low barometric pressure, and the black damp started to release. I forget, I think it was 2 kids and either 1 or 2 rescuers died. So the rescuers came, saw the kids down there, they panicked, they went down in there with no breathing apparatus, and they suffocated from the black damp as well. When I worked as a surface mine inspector, I was out with a colleague, and it was an area where they had surface mined there as well, probably during World War II. And of course, it was unreclaimed. So you had this big open pit, but there were old mine openings going into the hill, and they had put chain link fence over the openings. And he had climbed down in there. It was summertime, and he's, I'm watching him. He's picking some blackberries and eating some blackberries, and he walks over to this mine opening, and he's standing there, and he goes, there's a dead bird laying here. Yeah. And I'm going, Jim, move out of there. Jim, move out of there. Well, he finally walks away, and he goes, man, I got really lightheaded standing there. I'm like, yeah, it's called black damp. Stand there long enough, you'll die. There's no oxygen there. So that's it. It's colorless. It's odorless. I had a site when I worked for Abandoned Mine Reclamation over near Davistown in Greene County. And I had this lady call me and said, hey, I think we got some old mine openings here. I'd like you to come out and take a look at them. So I come out, and she's got her 3 kids with her. Well, they go on to tell me that the kids have been going in these mine openings and playing. And they're telling me, oh yeah, the one kid, he went back in there, and he said, once you get back in there, ways, there's coal cars in there. And I'm telling them, and I'm going, look, I know it's hard for you to understand as a child, but you could have gone in there and been overcome with black damp, and unless they found you with bloodhounds, your parents wouldn't know whether you were kidnapped, aliens came and took you away. They'd have no idea where you are. So we would post signs, stay out, stay alive. Everybody thinks that the problem with going into an old abandoned mine is having the rock fall out of the roof and kill you. That's the least of your worries. The black damp, the atmosphere is really the bigger issue. And I honestly thought when that lady fell in there, and again, I had no idea what her physical condition was like beforehand, but I was guessing that the fall wasn't what killed her. I figured she got in there and there was black damp and she suffocated.
I figured she probably fell on the cone of what would have fallen.
That's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
When it caved in, it created a cone, and she landed on top of that and rolled off to one side. But there were about 5 entries that intersected there. And so those are often the places that cave in first, is where I showed you the rooms, the entries, and crosscuts. Well, that's the biggest opening in the mine, is generally going to be where those intersections are. And if you look at old aerial photos, can you pull up our file, our downloads? I can probably show you pretty quick. Go here. No. Yeah, files. And into the downloads. And then scroll down a ways. Keep going. Are you all the way at the bottom? No. Keep going. Keep going. All right. Find me a Westmoreland old aerial. Hang on. You got to let them load a little bit.
There's a Westmoreland.
Yeah, try that one. See if that's one of them. It'll work. start scrolling in just to. Okay, stop. See how this looks like a bunch of bomb craters? See over here? You see these craters? See that? That's where you're getting close to the outcrop of the Pittsburgh coal seam. These are the intersections in between the pillars where it's caving in. So if you go and look, these are aerial photographs from like 1938. Go ahead, pull out a little bit, Kath.
Where is that? What road's that?
I think this might be Marguerite.
Okay, well, I've walked all over that area too.
You know, so this is where the mine was. Looks like there's some right in here, maybe.
Actually, all those fields right there, I looked for Indian artifacts.
Did you find any?
Lots of them.
Yeah. Yes. Open up a different one.
And I walked, yeah, a lot of those mines, I walked across them back and forth and
No. I'm not sure where that one is.
have you looked across up on the hill across from Kim's?
Oh yeah. Yeah, this is back home, Kath. This is, I think, the Loyal Hannah. So scroll in over here somewhere. Yeah, I'm not seeing anyone there. But again, you go look at these old aerial photos and you'll see it's just pockmarked with where those old mines have collapsed.
Yeah, they went in across the road from us up there and retrieved all the pillars. So they cut all that out.
I mean, it's amazing what they were able to retrieve, you know, with not much cover on it.
Oh, yeah.
You know, now, you know, you're over in Greene County and they're over 1,000 feet deep underground now.
Yeah, the tops of those mines were only maybe 15 feet below the surface or even less.
Yeah, this is Salemville here, Kath. So right here, see all this? That's right. That's Olga Road. So that's Keppel's Field.
Yeah.
So you can see where all that's collapsed in.
That site that was for the subsidence insurance, is that also the site where you could see a map of your area?
It's going to just be a general map. Can we maybe try one more time, Kath?
Oh, no, that's okay,
It says that there's no internet available. You can't.
I looked at that map and it showed the mining across from us.
across the street, but
Up
not
in
where we
JR's
are.
field, yeah, where he was talking about, where all those pits are behind the
Yeah.
church.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes right above there and then the next.
It's
above-
connected.
Above the church.
But you
Was
don't
across
see
that
any on
hill.
our
So
side.
try opening the internet again.
The other mine was up on the
It's
hill
showing it
above
here.
Roadhouse and went back at
Yeah,
Donald's.
that's okay.
PA Mine Map Atlas. So this is going to show you more specifically mine maps.
Okay.
So here you can see they're showing you the whole bituminous coal field. And pretty much if you live over that, chances are very good it's undermined. If you would, Kath, up here where it has layers, then the bituminous region, scroll down, keep going, keep going, keep going, stop. Pittsburgh, click on that. And so it's showing you some of the mine maps. So if you would scroll in, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. I know it's slow to load. And so they pieced together all these maps. This is only one map. All right. So, and it's showing you, you know, a little more. This is just showing you shaded. This is showing you actual mine workings in here. So if you just want to look at a general layer, this is the side to choose. If you want to look at more specific maps, go ahead and turn that Pittsburgh layer off, Kathy. Come over here to where it says maps found. and hit that, and then just go click on any spot on the map. And this is actually how many maps they have covering that area. So go ahead and just click on the eyeball on one of them and see if it loads up. So that's that particular mind map. If you go to the far side and scroll all the way down, Kath, over on the layers list, see the base map? Now you got to scroll again to see the base maps. Give me the Bing imagery. So you can see it's giving you an aerial. So if you know where your house is, you can specifically, and then go back up to the Pittsburgh seam layer. So back down. Grab that slider and move the slider.
How can you tell if there's any money?
Keep going.
You found the area.
Something.
Oh wait, it's on. I'm sorry. You got to go up. Keep going to that one. So you can change the transparency. So if this was your house, you can change the transparency of it, and then come back. So open up another tab and just type in PADEP mine subside. I guess I got to do that, huh? All right.
You got it.
So mine subsides insurance. That's probably under check for risk. And that's probably, put in an address. It's just going to give you a general overview.
But you can put your address in here,
Right.
latitude and longitude.
Yes. And it might have insurance rates in the site as well.
Interesting.
So yeah, those are a couple sites.
We can maybe see the explosion.
I'm kind of geeky about this stuff, so I find it very fascinating. Not everybody else does.
Well, I do the same thing, look up Indian
Yeah.
places, things like that, yeah.
Oh, I need to hit control. And then go ahead and try it. Yep, go ahead. Here we go. This is the explosion. Open this, hit it here, Kath. This is the Brewston experimental mine. And that's what a coal and dust explosion looks like. So, again, I mentioned that our father grew up in Van Meter where the Dar mine exploded. And he said that, the older folks there said that it actually shot coal cars out into the river like a cannon.
Wow.
Where'd it go?
You're going to have to go back.
Yeah, the dust is much more explosive.
Sorry.
Yeah, hit the... So this mine is still there. They still use this for different types of experiments they perform underground. Working for the Bureau of Mine Safety, we had what we called expectations training. And what it was is they would set up a fog machine in here to simulate smoke in the mine. And you have self-rescuers, the original self-rescuers, and they probably came about, I'm going to guess, maybe in the 40s. They were a metal canister, and they had a chemical in it called hopcalite. And hopcalite would convert the carbon monoxide to carbon dioxide, which isn't poisonous. But you're relying on there still being some oxygen in the atmosphere. So it had a mouthpiece that would look kind of like, a diver's mouthpiece for a snorkel or something. You put that into your mouth, had a headband to hold it on, and then it had plugs for your nostrils. But it's an exothermic chemical reaction, which means it gives off heat. So the longer you had it in that atmosphere, the hotter it would get. So men that actually got trapped in the mine with mine fires, they would come out and their lips would be blistered from the heat of that thing. They don't use those anymore. Back in 1980, when I worked in the mine for the summer, that's what they still used. You know, you carried it on your mine belt. Now they actually have a self-contained self-rescuer that has actual oxygen. And they have different units depending on the length of time. Most of them are either a 20-minute or a 30-minute. And then the mines have caches of those throughout the mine. And then they have what's called a lifeline. They run a string that will have different shaped objects on it, whether it's a cone or something that will tell you the direction of travel. And this is actually my hard hat from work. And if you can see inside there, I actually have a sticker that tells you what the different things on the lifeline are. So if you come to something that goes to a cone and drops, to a cone and drops, that's telling you right adjacent to you is a cache of self-contained self-rescuers. So if you get caught in the mine and there's a mine fire and you've had that thing on for 20 minutes or so, and it's 20 minutes if you're just, but there's a mine fire. I'm probably not breathing like that. I'm probably breathing a lot harder than that. So we would go down here for training. And as I said, they'd turn a fog machine on and you literally couldn't see the hand in front of your face. And we would have dummy self-rescuers that would simulate what it's like to breathe with the self-rescuer. And we would don these self-rescuers. And then in addition to the lifeline, you have a line that you get your entire crew together and you hook together with a line so you don't lose anybody. So we would line up, hook up, and work our way through the mine. And it's, you know, it's not real, but it's still a little freaky. But it can be a little humorous too, because when you come out, those things make you slobber like crazy. And you look and everybody's shirts are wet when they come out. And
How big are those things?
the self-contained self-rescuers, they're probably about so wide,
they
so
can be
high.
stored on,
Yeah, and you know, you have to pull the top off. You have a valve on there, you open, you don the thing. It has a bag that will inflate, and then it even has a set of goggles for you to put on because your eyes are probably going to burn from the smoke. I mean, we've all smelled coal smoke, right? Whew, pretty potent stuff, and with the sulfur in there, it's going to burn your eyes.
I was just curious why they never adopted like the EABs that we used on the boat, on a submarine or whatever. But they had a full face mask.
Right.
Fit over, and then you put this thing in and it generated oxygen. It get warm, but you were not breathing that hot.
Right.
And
Well, one part of it is that it still needs to be fairly easy to carry
Yeah, this
because
would've
you
been-
have it on you when you're working.
this would have been maybe a little more bulkier.
Yeah. So one of the last times I did this training, one of the fellows that was behind me was one of our underground stone mines because we also do all the inspections for our underground stone mines. So up on the ridge, you got the Springfield, the Rich Hill, down at Gans, they're above Coal Spring, up at Torrance, and these mines are high. They're 40 feet high, and they're mostly non-gassy, so you can drive a diesel pickup truck in there. And one of our inspectors for those he's a big man. There's just no other way to put it. And so his conditioning level's a little suspect. Well, when you're doing this, they also have a place where there's a culvert pipe in there. It's about this big. And so you all have to crawl through the culvert pipe and come out. And the whole way I'm going through there, I can hear this guy behind me. So when he came out, I told him, I said, I was terrified. I thought I had Darth Vader chasing me the whole way through that mine. But yeah, sad to think that, you know, all the work that they've done here just on, you know, testing electrical equipment, roof bolts, you name it. This is NIOSH. It used to be called the United States Bureau of Mines, but now it's part of the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. That they're closing that facility. We have a Mine Safety and Health Administration office here up at Mount Pleasant by the old Chrysler plant. That's the federal side. I worked for the state side. That particular office has conducted the most investigations in the United States for underground mines. And over the past several years, they have conducted 1 out of every 7 fatal investigation out of that office, and they're closing it. Makes no sense to me whatsoever. I feel sad for the miners today, you know, to lose that valuable resource. So hopefully my colleagues that are still left at the Pennsylvania Bureau of Mine Safety will make sure we've got the backs of the miners out there. Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.